Others who've just been living off of the way the security industry has worked for decades, they either got to catch up or they're just going to get phased out because the world is moving on. And I think it's moving on in a really good direction. We just got to continue to execute on that. You can't manage an enormous fleet globally by on-prem solutions, thinking that you're going to remote desktop into those and manage it all. You've got to be able to do that at a click of a button. Otherwise, you're just hiring a whole bunch of humans to do work on every location, and that's just not scalable. And so when we think about orchestration, we broke it down into data gathering orchestration, into deterrence or action orchestration, and then what we call data validation orchestration. And so we built that logic and capability within the actual security unit itself. Now, we didn't deliberately do that because we wanted to build an orchestration platform. We did it because that's what made sense to solve the problem. But in learning that, we became aware of the value of agility and flexibility that you have when you can change the workflow rules decoupled from the connectivity itself.
Welcome to the new automation mindset where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. So today I have with me Steve Lindsey, CTO and one of the founding partners of LiveView Technologies, or short LVT. So maybe you guys have seen one of these blue blinking towers. It has a solar cell, it's on a trailer, and typically you find them in a big box retailer parking lot. And that's the LVT security system, fully integrated, turnkey hardware, IoT, cloud software security system, really one of a kind. And Steve and his team, they architected it. So it's a true honor to have you here on this podcast. Maybe to kick this off, Steve, just tell us a little bit. I mean, you built this system. It's kind of like life's work in a way. Tell us a little bit about your core product, how it's built, what makes it so special.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Markus. Yeah, as you described, a lot of people recognize the product by the blue flashing light in the parking lots, but really what's happening behind the scene is quite complex. But to understand what it is, I think we have to understand what the physical security market and some of the challenges that they have. To date, we've had a lot of antiquated technologies, usually what we call passive solutions, where maybe cameras are recording. If an event happens, you go back and hopefully the recording was there, right? Because a lot of times these systems are down and nobody even knew. But then you're searching through just footage trying to find, well, who did it, right? And a lot of times it's blurry and you don't have a lot of success in finding that. But what we have found is that what a lot of customers really want is preventative type security. They want to prevent the thing from happening instead of trying to catch the person who did it. It's whether they caught them or not, it's really expensive. If they're stealing copper out of solar farms, if they're even from a life safety perspective, every life is precious, and so trying to prevent those types of life safety issues from happening is really important. So the approach that we took was, how do we take technology and take it to another level where it becomes a force multiplier of typical guard services, right? So the only way that we've really been able to solve the problem is to put a guard in place, but guards are very expensive, right? Paying by the hour. It's not the greatest pay, so that you don't find the greatest individuals, who are trying to do this work. One of the running jokes that we had, 10 years ago when we started this was, a lot of companies will hire a guard to then watch their guards because sometimes the guards are in on the problem. So it's just always been a problem when it comes to physical security. So the approach we took was, can we take technology and some of the advancements we've seen to date and try to prevent the issue from happening, which means that we have to be way more accurate detecting threats, and then we have to be very effective in how we deter them from proceeding the plan that they have. So what we came up with was this solution which we call the D3 system: detect, deter, and defend. And the idea is that with artificial intelligence, we should be able to accurately detect that there is someone there, whether it be a human or a vehicle, and that they are essentially intending to do something wrong based on some behaviors that we can detect, which are really trained by previous incidents. Let me give you an example. If somebody gets out of a car at a retail parking lot, two people get out of a car, and they both go in different doors, that's not a normal behavior. Most people go in the same door together, right? So, or if someone gets out of their car and they start to serpentine in between cars, that's not a normal behavior. That's typically someone who's casing a parking lot, trying to look for a car to smash and grab, right? So those are the types of things that I'm talking about. So when we can detect that, now the question is, what do we do to deter it? And so we were one of the first companies that was able to take these deterrence ideas where, whether it's be visual indicators or audible indicators that are more personable, and be able to essentially make an announcement in real time. Hey, we see you in the blue shirt. You're being watched and recorded. The authorities are on alert. Just kind of a notice, right? And what we found is that the majority of the time, in fact, statistically, it's usually around 70% of the time, most people will leave. That's just all it takes. Anything beyond that typically will take some form of a human to be involved. And we call that an escalation. So if the system can't deal with it, then we escalate it to a human who then tries to take more action on that, whether they deploy a manned guard service to go deal with the incident, maybe they call the police, or maybe they'll get on in live on the two-way talk down and interact with the person and just kind of let them know, don't proceed. So that's really how the solution works. Again, it's a force multiplier. Deploying these types of technologies is typically 1/4 of the cost of what a human guard would be. So you can see from a cost perspective, it's way cheaper to do, but it's also more effective, and it helps in that force multiplier with guard services. So that's the fundamental core of the technology. I guess the other differentiator with this is understanding that it's rapid deployable. So security is typically an emotional decision. So a lot of our customers don't have the time to engage system integrators, to engage your typical trenching of power, installing communications, even the friction of trying to get the IT departments and InfoSec departments within these companies to be able to test and make sure from a security perspective it's not going to introduce a vulnerability onto their networks. So we don't have to deal with any of that with our customers, because this thing literally can just be wheeled up to the location where they want it. Within 15 minutes, it's up and it's now running security full turnkey, as you mentioned, and it doesn't touch any of the IT systems of that particular enterprise. And then from an enterprise scalability perspective, we built this thing to deal with thousands, tens of thousands of locations that an enterprise may have to secure, and to be able to do that at a click of a button, managing user life cycle of employees, when we're talking about identity and access management. And what we'll be talking about more today is that integration and orchestration of this types of system with other technologies within that ecosystem of security. So,
yeah, no, this is really cool. I mean, listen, I'm listening to this. I'm actually learning a lot that I didn't know. I mean, it seems very impressive. It seems like you guys really improved on what physical security used to be. You made it like really easy to deploy, right? There's a lot of parallels with Workato, to be honest. Like, we tried to improve on the integration industry. I mean, we had done it. We were actually part of what it was before, and we knew where we're kind of like why it was so complicated and all the intricacies that from physical security, and we wanted to change that. And we also ease of use and speed and so on was very important. We felt that was a downfall of what was there before, and integration, and a lot of parallels. Now, seems like you guys have an impressive product. We obviously feel very proud of Workato and what we have. Now, you've been, just like me, we both have been part of this from the ground up. You got an impressive product, you got a kind of almost like disruptive solution, and then often it's harder to sell this than you think, right?
Right.
I mean, it almost feels like, why wouldn't you? I mean, why wouldn't you go for this? And then it's a lot harder. Talk to me, like, how was the LVT journey? Like, what was the ups and downs, and how did you? Now, obviously, you're a very successful a company, but what was the friction on the way? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, every entrepreneur probably has very similar stories. We took a very unique approach, though, in that as a technology company, we didn't seek seed funding or your typical venture capital funding out of the gate. It was mostly friends and family and your own lines of credit was how we started. So I wouldn't say that was necessarily intentional, but it was just kind of, we didn't see what we would become. And I don't think a lot of companies do. I mean, you see a problem that needs addressing, and that's what we did. We jumped in and we saw an opportunity in the early days where live streaming video outdoors was a very unique thing. Again, this is back in the middle of 2000s. Live streaming was mostly for situations like this, where we're doing video conferencing, right? But to take a camera outdoors in a rugged environment anywhere on the planet was unheard of at the time. And one of my co-founders and my other co-founder, they were both in finance, and they thought, well, how do we get people to convert from a construction loan to a 30-year mortgage, which is where a lot of loan officers make their money. And so they just had this idea, well, what if we put a live streaming camera on their house getting built and provided them the ability to get in and see the progress of their home, right? So it was kind of a naive but yet very innocent idea as a motivation to a different end. And when they set up the first system, again, they didn't really know what they were doing. They just kind of asked some friends and family, like, how would you do this? And luckily, IP cameras were a thing finally. Had they tried this a year before, they probably wouldn't have had any success. But what they learned was that it wasn't the homeowner that cared about the live camera. It was actually the home builder, because they could use it as a project management tool. Instead of driving to every construction site, they could just get into the camera. And all of a sudden, they started having all these construction companies calling them. And next thing you know, they were like, hey, we should just start a business doing this. And then, long story short, when they got into it, they needed some technology experts. And so somehow I got, introduced to them. I saw it as a unique problem, and I kind of joined on board. So the reason why I'm telling you this is we started off not really to be a security company. We started off to just live stream video outdoors because we knew how valuable it was, but also how unique of a technology it was, as well as how difficult it was. And so that's how we set out to do it. And so again, kind of organic growth in the business. We didn't really think, oh, this is a venture capital idea, so let's go get some money. So we just started growing the business. Now, what was unique about us was we never saw it as a selling of a product. We saw it as selling as a service. And so we always had this service subscription model as part of our business, which was very valuable to us at the time, because as you understand, as you get customers who are paying for the service, that you can continue to build upon that, right? Which is a lot easier than one-time sales. So as we continued to build the business, what happened is we evolved into security. Naturally, people think cameras, they think security. And so for the longest time, we fought that off. But as we developed new technologies to solve problems, it led us down this road to security. So when we think about the problems that we had to solve in the early days with no money, it was just a grind. And with placing cameras in remote areas, I spent weeks, and a lot of my business partners, we would spend weeks at a time just driving lonely in a car, throughout North Dakota fixing DOT cameras for them, or Wyoming or Colorado, and Utah. And just late nights, it was always a cash crunch. I remember we would come up to payroll and we would be like, all right, well, where's the money coming from to make payroll today? And somehow the next day somebody would pay us a check and, hey, we'd have payroll. Or a lot of times we would just say, all right, well, hey, don't cash your check, to the founders. Don't cash your check. We don't have money. We just got to make sure the money we do have is for the employees that we have. It was just a constant grind. And so, yeah, I mean, I could tell horror stories time and time again, but it's funny now because you look back on it and you're like, oh, laugh, laugh, laugh. But man, at the time, you just didn't know. You had no clue what the company would become, and you just continued to work on it and to put the hours and the effort into it and make the sacrifices needed, in hopes that something great would happen. And I will also say this: we never thought of ourselves as being this big business. We always thought that maybe this would be a lifestyle business for us. If we could just get the subscription up to this amount of money, then hey, we could just live off that the rest of our lives. But as the technology continued to improve and the innovations came and the problems that we were solving became a really good product market fit, you could just see that growth in the business. And so it was like we had to recalibrate our brains around, well, now we got to rethink this way. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey along the way of sacrifice, but we like to just call it grit, guts, and determination, because that's really what you have to make it through a lot of that stress.
So one of the details, right? So I mean, you guys obviously do some very sophisticated detection. When you started to explain, I mean, this isn't just like, someone appearing on a video. This is a lot more than that. And I think one of the ways how you architected that from the beginning was with a cloud service, which was unique, right? Which I think back then in physical security was always local. Yes. Typically. We had that at Workato. When we started this, we were like, well, if we want to simplify integration, if we want to make this scalable, if we want to take all the deployment hassle out, I mean, there really isn't another way than to make it cloud. And so that's how we designed our solution at the beginning. And then we ran into lots of adversity. I tell you, I mean, we always were kind of, I think there were these couple years where it felt like we would always be among the last two to be evaluated. People really liked the solution. They said like, oh, you're a cloud service? Like, yeah, maybe not. Yeah. Does that sound familiar?
Well,
I mean,
do you guys have familiar? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how did that, how did you guys overcome that? Again, for us, I mean, looking backwards, I do believe, I mean, you talked about this, like the solution being designed for, like, I mean, you said, I think, tens of thousands of locations, right? For us, how would you even do that without being a cloud service? I mean, when you have Workato is this like serverless Kubernetes-based service that you can scale up and down, and it is really, really scalable and also reliable because of the architecture. It's kind of the difference between having like a nuclear power station or having your generator in the backyard, yeah. Right? I mean, one of the two kind of does scale better than the other. Yeah. How did you guys get through those challenges that people maybe didn't appreciate that? Yeah.
I think we did it out of necessity to start with. When you think about us starting the service, we in the early days, we got involved very heavily with Department of Transportation. So again, we were providing a service for them to live stream cameras. And the way that it would work with them is they would point at a location on the ground and say, this is where I need the camera to be. Now, they didn't care about infrastructure. There may have been no power. There may have been no communications there. They just said, this is where the snow drifts typically happen. And so I have to have a camera right here to watch it. And so we're the ones who had to figure out how to solve that problem. And in and one of the key components of that was the enterprise management of that entire fleet, knowing what the telemetry is, knowing what the configuration settings are. Like all of that had to be decentralized from the location. And when you think about the typical security solutions, they're all on-prem, right? And in fact, we still use the term closed circuit television, which basically indicates, right, cameras wired back to a recording device on-prem. That wasn't going to work for us. We had to think about how to manage this globally. And so we inherently were solving problems and innovating with a decentralized approach because of necessity. So as we developed the solution for that, it became the enabler for scale for our business. And it was the only way that it was going to work. So when we applied this now to security and we started selling to these security industries, again, they had the same mentality. In fact, we joked that they would say that the cloud was a 4-letter word and they didn't want anything to do with it. But what we told them was, can you imagine thousands of these things in your enterprise and you have to manage all of that and keep it up and running? The system is no good if it's not up and running. It's like a guard falling asleep. So the importance of the uptime, the importance of the security of the unit itself, even from a cybersecurity perspective, was absolutely critical. And so by having those discussions with them, you could tell in their minds they were kind of reluctantly agreeing with you, even though they probably had concerns about data, right? Where's the data living? And what's the security of that data? Because if it's not in my little fortress, I don't trust it. And I think that's where a lot of these entities had that hard time dealing with. But the interesting thing was we could see like a hockey stick growth and acceptance of cloud services, I would say from like 2015, 2016 up to the pandemic. And really the pandemic, I think, is what really unlocked it for a lot of people. They were realizing that the cloud actually is way easier to deal with than just these on-prem systems. And so that I don't think we're seeing the friction now like we used to back in the day. But yeah, in the early day, it was extremely difficult. And the only way that we got around that, like I said, was to help them understand that you can't manage an enormous fleet globally by on-prem solutions and thinking that you're going to remote desktop into those and manage it all. It all has to be inherently cloud native, both in the telemetry and the monitoring of those systems, as well as the configuration and management of those systems. And especially when you start thinking about workflows and how all of that is managed on either a regional, at a location, or even an enterprise level, you've got to be able to do that at a click of a button, because otherwise you're just hiring a whole bunch of humans to do work on every location. And that's just not scalable, right? So that's our experience with it.
Yeah, no, I think we had a similar experience. No, we with the mid-size, like lower end enterprises that we dealt with, I think it was starting 2015, I think is kind of similar. And then with the very large enterprises, it was really the pandemic that unlocked the potential, because some of them had I remember one of our customers had their SAP system set up so it could only, for security reasons, so it could only be used in the office.
Yeah.
You might get where this is going. Not a good idea. I mean, we also have some retailers, international retailers, that were fully just brick and mortar until the pandemic happened, and then very, very quickly had to scramble to get something up online, and they needed something fast, like a Workato, to get there. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, so very impressive service. It's really cool to also hear the other startup stories. But then somehow we found each other. And so what I understand is that you guys actually saw value in orchestration, that you actually tried to build your own Workato also. Tell me a little bit, what got you there? What did you see as requirements or something? How did you, what did you sense orchestration could unlock or increase the value of your solution? And then what what was your experience trying to build an orchestration solution yourself?
Yeah. So our journey into this building an orchestration platform really begins with the edge component of our solution. So I mentioned that there is a deterrence capability of the system, and really at the heart of that is a localized orchestration engine that knows how to take data from various cameras or RF sensors. There's a whole bunch of sensors that are on this thing that's kind of measuring the environment. And they're all isolated IoT devices, if you can imagine, right? Because each one of these systems could have like 3 cameras on it. They could have a radar. They could have an RF sensor. And so they were all of these sensors were built as a standalone black box, right? It doesn't understand context of anything else around it. And so we had to be able to bring that data in and make sense of what it's seeing, right? And obviously AI helps with that. But then when we start thinking about, well, now that we know we've got a problem that we've got to deter, how do we deter that? And so when we think about orchestration, we broke it down into data gathering orchestration, into deterrence or action orchestration, and then what we call data validation orchestration. And so we built that logic and capability within the actual security unit itself. So that thing with the blue lights flashing inside of that, its brain, is this orchestration engine. So now we didn't deliberately do that because we wanted to build an orchestration platform. We did it because that's what made sense to solve the problem. But in learning that, we became aware of the value of the agility and flexibility that you have when you can change the workflow rules decoupled from the connectivity itself. Now, as we started to look at how do we handle the scaling of the software services, both that have to run on the edge and in the cloud services, especially as you start scaling that across multiple data centers, you start getting into these concepts of microservices. Now, I'm coming at this from a product development perspective, but I will relate it back to an IT business perspective too. But from a product development perspective, there's a big push around microservices in distributed computing because of this very problem. And it really comes down to where is it running, the amount of developers that are working on it, and the potential conflicts and breaking of code that they can each do to each other. And then the speed at which you've got to develop, right? And all of these things relate to each other. And so when you look into the development patterns of microservices, you start seeing things like event-driven architectures, right, that can help solve these problems. And so we were starting to implement a lot of those in our cloud services and our edge services, again, to help the business scale from a product development perspective. But as I mentioned before, we were a very cash-strapped company with no VC funding. So we literally had no salespeople up until 2020. We ran the business for 15 years with no salespeople. We had no IT business systems. We had happened to adopt a cloud native email service in the early days. And so we were just, you're running email that way, but everything was spreadsheets and whatever else as we ran it. So when we finally got our first round of money to help pour gas on the speed that we were growing, we finally actually needed to put in IT business systems. And when we did that, I was very, very intentionally, first of all, trying to avoid on-prem software. I wanted everything to be cloud native as an IT stack. We also didn't want to get locked into a monolithic solution. So it wasn't my intention to go buy some of the big boys who supposedly could do it all in one box. I knew that I wanted to be able to take the best-in-class services across the board. And I started taking the patterns that we were using in our software development for that event-driven architecture and saying, there's got to be a way to do this in IT. Because each one of these services, are basically a microservice from a developer's perspective, right? They're just this thing that does a CRM really well or an ERP really well. And so we thought, well, let's just apply the same concepts that we did in product development to the IT stack. And that's where we started building our own, or trying to, using the methodologies that we were using in product development. The problem with that is it's extremely complicated to build these systems. And from an IT perspective, the business doesn't have patience for that, I learned. So if there's one regret I have back in the day, I wish I had known Workato existed back when we got that seed round of money and we were making that decision. Let me tell you why I think this is important. And I'm telling you from a program developer's perspective, not from an IT professional's perspective. When we think about integrations, we think about it where if I have an API in this service and I have an API in this service, well, it should just be easy to write the coupling between the two. And when you're writing a service like that, you're building essentially what I call the connectivity, right? And the protocols to talk. But then there's business logic to know what to do once that connectivity is in place, right? And what tends to happen is we overthink how simple it is to, first of all, build the business logic in there, but more importantly, the ongoing maintenance of that business logic. And what we fail to recognize is that businesses have to be agile, they have to be very flexible, and they have to be quick in how they change business logic, because the business is constantly changing. And you'll hear horror stories from an IT perspective around, well, we're locked in. The system was built to do this, and it's going to take 1 year to change it over to this, right? The businesses don't have time to think that slow anymore. They have to be able to switch that. And so from an IT perspective, I always wanted that ability to separate business logic from, which I call orchestration, from the connectivity in itself. And what's beautiful about Workato is the fact that, yeah, I can build these connectors, but then separate from the connectors, I can now build business logic in the recipes, right, and in the workflow, so I can get the outcome I want. And if something has to change, I can change it very quickly. I don't have to go back to a developer or even back to the company that built the integration and say, hey, will you please change your logic to do this? Right. And so anyway, I really am a fan of asynchronous connectivity, of event-driven architectures, and the separation of that. So as we look forward, security, now that security is becoming more of an IT problem than it's ever been before. In fact, let me stop here. Security's, I've always joked that security is technologically like 10 years behind the rest of the world. And so they're learning lessons that the rest of the world has already learned before. And one of those lessons is understanding integration, understanding workflow, and understanding ecosystems. And so no longer are we in the security industry cameras network coupled to an NVR. We are cameras that are also working with access control, which are working with other sophisticated systems that now have to be able to interchange events with each other. And there has to be ways to orchestrate how that data is moving, how command and control works between all of those things. And it has to be decoupled from connectivity to the business logic. And so we are trying to apply those patterns to our customers who are dealing with these problems, in their security ecosystems. And as I see them trying to solve them, I see them going down the roads of 10, 20 years ago that we've all learned don't work. Can we try it a different way? And that's where I'm trying to come in and say, this is a better way to do that. And so we've been using Workato to be able to teach them how you can separate connectivity from workflow in your ecosystem and have that agility and flexibility you need as the business changes. And especially with security, the bad actors are constantly changing their tactics to be able to compromise, right? And so the security professionals have to continually adapt to that, as well as what the business initiatives are, right? So they kind of get hit twice on the problem. But that's kind of our story and journey of why we built the platform and kind of where we are now and how Workato plugs into that.
Well, first of all, thank you. There's a lot to unwrap. I mean, what's going through my brain at the moment is at least 3 completely separate threads that I wanted to deep dive a little bit in. Let's start with the first one. And that's how you started off. You said like, "Hey, I'm coming from an engineering perspective." Look, I studied electrical engineering, so I appreciate what you guys build, like the IoT stuff and so on. That's super exciting. Now, very interesting. Like, in Workato, we said like we built this. We wanted to get more people involved than just like very few integration developers. All right, because we felt like, okay, I think we need a lot of this integration and workflow, and there's just not enough people there to actually do it. So you got a bottleneck, and so we wanted to be part of the solution to unlock that bottleneck. Now you, being in engineering, being in development, I mean, you could argue you're maybe not the one who has the bottleneck, because you got developers, right? You got actually people who can do this stuff, yet you actually appreciate, what Workato has done to make it maybe low code and make it easier to do. Tell me more about this, because I think there is something there that you said which was actually very profound, and we see this all the time. Yes, people do think when there's an API, right? They think like, oh, there's an API, so integration challenge solved. And that always seems to be, at the end, tends to be a wake-up call in a way. I mean, so we built, like at Workato, so we sell to multiple ways. You guys, LVT, you use Workato in your business systems also, right? And now you're talking here about maybe, okay, so how can we use Workato with the LVT core product also? We actually sell both ways. We sell direct to IT people, and then we do sell to software companies who kind of embed us into their products. Okay, so what I wanted to say was that a lot of the software companies who pick us to then build us into their software stack, typically they tend to have tried it before and had some bad experience. They said like, there's an API, it's done. And then it ended up, oh my God, it's a lot more difficult to do. Or maybe, then you have to hire like very expensive system integrators to actually use these APIs. So they had bad experience, and then they come to Workato. Tell me a little bit like what gets you, even though you have the resources to use these APIs and so on, and you have people who could code against it. Why do you feel like something like Workato is really important?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the difference between event-driven architectures and which are asynchronous. I think it's important people understand the asynchronous component of that versus a synchronous integration, or what I call point-to-point integration. Where people don't understand the difference is when they don't understand the difference between the development of it and the ongoing maintenance of it. And what the problem we're trying to solve is really for the ongoing maintenance, because that's where it becomes a problem. When we think about resourcing in a company, product engineering is a great example of this. You've got all these high-paid engineers, and you're trying to keep them busy working on creating value for the company. But as you're continually innovating and creating value, you have historical products and services that you have to continue to maintain, and there's still a demand and a call for those services to be updated as well. And as you're continuing to innovate, it also puts pressure on the historical software services to also be updated as well. So as you continue over time to develop software, you're just creating this cobweb of mess that continually gets bigger and bigger. And if you think about it from a point-to-point integration, that's where things start to break. And so that's where event-driven architectures are really, really awesome, because what you can do is you can separate what you can do is you can take a black box as a service that does its job really well. Again, in development, we call that a microservice. But it doesn't matter if that thing is just a little microservice or if it's a big macro service. It's still a black box to the rest of the system. So if that service can just publish things to a common bus that says, I did this, and it doesn't care who got it, then you can start getting into an area where you can start decoupling services from each other. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't still important factors to what do the data models look like, what is the schema for those models. Those things are still important, but you're able to do it in a passive asynchronous way, and one service is no longer so tightly coupled to another that if you make one code change, it's going to break this one. And so you have to bring both of those services along the journey together. It allows you to develop all these various services and just let the coupling of that live asynchronously, right? So when we think about IT systems, they're no different. You've got all these systems, which if you think about it, they're being sourced by different vendors. And so they're all on their own development schedules anyway. And they're all going to release and update their services at their own schedule without any consideration of any other service that might be within the ecosystem. And businesses end up taking the brunt of all of that. So the problem is, again, a decoupling problem. You have to be able to effectively decouple services from each other, but then allow them to work and exchange data. And that's where I believe event-driven architectures are the answer to that. And then orchestration on top of that is what solves the problem. So it doesn't matter if you're developing your own product or if you're running software services in a business stack, the problems are exactly the same. It's the ongoing maintenance and agility to change down the road that becomes expensive. And let's just look at it from a resourcing perspective. If everyone sat around twiddling their thumbs looking for work to do, it wouldn't be a problem. But because we usually utilize our engineering resources a lot, when we come back to them and say, hey, will you stop what you're doing and hurry and make this change over here? And you keep doing that to them every day, you never make progress, right? And that's really the problem we're trying to describe here. And that's why you can't assume that by building it, it works great and it will always be great on ongoing maintenance, because it won't. They're off doing something else. And so now you have to have the agility to deal with it in a faster, more agile way.
I mean, I can tell you, I mean, so just to stay on that point of the maintenance aspect, I can tell you I have seen IT organization that have been completely bogged down by just doing maintenance. I mean, they started all these projects some time back and thought it was a project and it would be time bound and done, and then realized that it just was dragging these incredible maintenance streams to the point where at some time they wake up 10 years later, they wake up and they realize, oh my God, we actually do 80% of what we do is maintenance.
Yep.
And maybe 20%. I mean, if you're lucky, is you can do something new. You're basically completely bogged down by the whole thing. The other thing is that what I've seen, then people basically wave their hands up when they get to that point and say like, let's just outsource that. And then what they do is they hand it over to someone, and another 5 years later, they wake up and they go like, oh my God, we lost complete control of what we can do. It's like we're now at the mercy of someone else, like 10 hours around the world that we only can talk to at 10 p.m. at night, and nothing is happening. And actually that speed of innovation is further gone down.
Yeah.
And then they're yeah.
Yeah. And to add to that, like when we think about technology and business, they've traditionally been on separate innovative or separate initiative paths, I guess is the best way to put it. The business thinks that IT is a project and a cost center, and they don't see it as something that helps them be a force multiplier, right, and scale. And then IT sees the world as, well, we're just trying to build these technologies and we want them to be built perfectly, right? As engineers think, we like to make sure they're perfect. And those two worlds don't work together. Because the business has to be agile and it needs technology to get its initiatives done. And so everything has to be faster. And the only way that works, you can't outsource faster, right? You can't say that I'm going to put all the maintenance of my IT stack in someone else's hands when every single day the business is making decisions that could impact the IT decisions. And so you're not going to be able to deal with that in a statement of work with a contractor. Right? They're just going to do the work that you told them to do, but a month later, when you need to change it, it's not as flexible as you think that it was. And so, yeah, it all comes back to speed and agility in the maintenance of the systems themselves. And the only way you can do that is to, again, separate connectivity from orchestration, and that's where I believe this whole event thing is moving. And I see a lot of potential for Workato moving forward as more businesses understand this problem of IT and business working together to accelerate instead of being at odds with each other.
So you kept saying event driven like multiple times now. So I want to deep dive onto this one a little bit. And I very interestingly you described the IT and the business world. I couldn't agree more, by the way. So I started off my career actually on the business side. I was in a consulting company, strategy consulting company, Booz Allen, and I did process mapping. So I was on the requirement side of these transformations. And the odds that IT and the business was, I mean, back then was just mind-boggling. So here's the thing, event-driven. In Workato, we created this thing called a trigger, which is basically an event that kicks off an orchestration. And a lot of people, I don't know why, but a lot of people, or maybe I guess it just makes sense, which is a good thing in a way, but people don't understand why this is actually an innovation. Because in our old world of integration, you really didn't have that trigger. In modern systems now, and I think it comes back to this point of kind of saying like, okay, well, I got an API, so integration problem solved, or thinking of like, I got an API, now the event-driven problem is solved. It actually isn't. So modern systems sometimes have webhooks, and so that's event-driven.
That's event-driven.
Good.
Yep.
That's good.
Yep.
There's other challenges with the webhooks that sometimes, they maybe not. You might lose some, and if it's like a finance system, you don't want to do that. So we do backup polling for these kind of things. But in Workato, the trigger event basically takes an API, which often is just a request of give me information, but it doesn't give you an event, and the trigger kind of almost creates the illusion like there were events, and the entire infrastructure is not even visible. In Workato, it's just there. People take it for granted, and they don't understand what it actually takes. I mean, there's like a queue below. I mean, again, there's like millions of these events happening, and you got to maintain all of that. You cannot lose a single one, and all of these kind of technical things. But what I thought was interesting is the event trigger in IT is so powerful to bring the business and IT together. Because if you think in IT, or if you think without events, maybe you attempted your integration by the good old batch integrations, like at midnight, move data from here to there, right? That's IT thinking, no events. Once you say like, okay, well, there's a new order, and now do this and this and that, I think that's how the business thinks. And so once you have that event trigger there, I think you're bridging IT and business. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, exactly. In fact, what's unique about LVT is we have a actual manufacturing division. So we actually have an assembly line. And I like to liken this analogy to an assembly line. When you think about IT business systems, they're like workstations on assembly line, right? Each station is responsible to do some task. Like an assembly line, you want to sequence that as smoothly as possible so that the takt time in each one of those, right, progresses evenly. When we think about business systems, they're no different. If I have a CRM system that, let's say I closed an opportunity, and that now needs to create either a fulfillment in manufacturing or a turning on of a service subscription. Again, those are just events. Those are things that say, this is now what I need you to do, service down the line in the assembly line. And so, idempotency is very important when we think about integrity of data. We also have to think about SLAs between each one of those services. Sometimes some services take longer than others, and you can't have an hourglass spinning waiting for that to happen. So, events are extremely important for handling all these various types of scenarios. And when I talk about pub sub, right, in the product development world, that's exactly what it is the event here says, hey, I'm publishing this, and we're waiting for these other sequences to take place within the workflow. And I may want to see what the response is so I can update my system that all this downstream work's been done, right? I mean, all that can be easily handled with events, and it can be handled in a way that can account for a service going offline, which is a real thing. And you've got to be able to catch it up to speed when it does finally come online. So yeah, there's all kinds of great benefits you get from it. But with that said, we talked about a lot of great things. Let me throw in some gotchas though. Like, event systems are inherently more complicated because of the nature of that. And so having a platform that can address a lot of those complicated things simplifies it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why when we went down the road of trying to build our own, we realized this is just getting more complicated. And it's just slow for us to build this. And so again, buy it versus build it. It was kind of what we came down to. So again, I think Workato's done a great job of not only bringing a platform, but bringing a platform that inherently adapts to all the varieties of historical software interfacing that we've had to deal with. You mentioned webhooks, you mentioned APIs. If you got a more advanced event broker, like Workato's been great at adapting that, and then bringing almost enabling a more legacy system to now be modernized, because now it can play right in this orchestrated event world. So yeah, again, kudos to Workato for thinking about that as well on bringing a myriad of different interfaces together and API type technologies and messaging and webhooks and whatever into this modern world that now can orchestrate it all.
No, thank you for that. I mean, I actually really liked the factory analogy. I mean, in a way, I mean, this is decades back. The car manufacturers, they would make a whole bunch of parts and stock them somewhere and then make a whole bunch. It was all batch oriented in a way, yes. Right? And then Toyota came around and they said like, no, just in time.
Yeah.
I think today, I don't think there's anyone who doesn't do just in time anymore. It's kind of like universally the standard. I mean, event-driven architecture, that's it. I mean, it's the exact same thing. So, but it is interesting, and I really appreciate your kind of the engineers' take on what it takes and appreciation of the platform and so on. That's really cool. So tell me, maybe last question here, because I'm really curious. So you're in physical security. I've been here almost 10 years at Workato. Before that, my last job was actually, I was the head of product at a company called Splunk. So cybersecurity. And at Splunk, what we saw is you had the SIM, the security incident event management, right? And then a new category would come, and it was called SOAR, security orchestration and remediation, which kind of a little bit was a Workato-ish in a way. It was a kind of connecting in the security center. It was connecting multiple tools together and so on. How do you, what do you see in your physical security world? If you add something like Workato to it, how do you see that evolve? What other system can be combined? Where do you see that going in the future?
Yeah, when we think about physical security, especially in today's environment where we're just seeing a lot more brazen activity by criminals, and really more than that, it's becoming way more organized. And when we think about legislation, there's legislation out now that police can't even really arrest or prosecute if the amount of theft, let's say, is under a certain dollar amount, right? And so it puts a lot of pressure on, we'll just say, retail establishments and others where a criminal literally will go in and only steal just under that dollar amount because they know they can get away with it, right? And so the way that we have to prosecute now is being able to aggregate over time how much theft a criminal has done. And especially when we think about organized crime, right? You have to be able to relate individuals to a similar organization. So when we think about a modern physical security ecosystem, what it looks like is the apparatuses that are detecting the incident. Then there's a concept called a case management where you have to, over time now, associate incidents to cases that hopefully will allow you to see patterns that it is the same person or groups that are doing it. And then you've got to work with law enforcement to be able to provide that as evidence which hasn't been tampered with, right? There's a chain of custody that goes along with that. So this modern physical security ecosystem has to account really for those three things. And there's very much a tight coupling that has to happen between those, at least from a moving data around. And so again, the thought is, well, do you build one monolithic system that does it all? Well, you can't, because police departments have to use their systems. There's compliance and governance things that they have to deal with, right? Retailers, on the other hand, they can't just open up all of their systems for the police to get in and look at any time, right? And so we have to rethink how a lot of this works. And luckily the physical security industry and some big players in this space, including ourselves, and you'll see some announcements coming out with partnerships that we have, where we're all trying to address that. We understand what our core competencies are in each one of those pillars and the value we bring. And now the challenge is, again, what does that integration and workflow look like between each one of those systems? And then how do you do that in an open way so that you're not trying to be monolithic to everyone? And then how do you do that where you can continue to maintain the integrity of the data, the loose coupling that's needed to maintain the data flows between those? Again, everything that we've been discussing here is applying to this new ecosystem the security industry is looking at in physical security. So I think that mimics similar to the SOAR idea that you have. But yeah, I think that's how the industry right now is starting to move. But again, there's a lot of thought leadership and there's a lot of trying to get people to think this new way. And luckily there's some big players that are sophisticated enough to understand these concepts and can lead the way. And I would just say that others who have just been kind of living off of the way the security industry has worked for decades, they either got to catch up or they're just going to get phased out because, the world is moving on and I think it's moving on in a really good direction. We just got to continue to execute on that. But yeah, to me, it is around a lot of this event and orchestration and being able to move data around.
Look, this was fascinating. I mean, I really, first of all, really appreciate you took the hour here to talk to us. Probably, our audience is like IT folks. They probably at the beginning thought okay, where's that going? Physical security. Yeah. But I think it was so special, when you started from your engineering perspective on why this matters. I think it was really special at the end where you said hey, your physical security world and some of the system world is coming together, right? It's not just system world from these case incident systems that your customers might have, and you want to connect those, and then you want to connect to another entity in the ecosystem, like the police, and so on. And I think that's interconnected world, I think, is just fascinating. We have a car manufacturer, electric car manufacturer. That's our customer. And, they used us with their backend systems. They're typical IT. And then we started talking, and they're the lights went up and they said hey, wait a second, we're also building these cars and we're having things we need to orchestrate there in the factory. Let's think about what we can do there. So hopefully what we managed to do with this episode is really to show people here, show the audience what else is out there, what other things are there where orchestration really, it's not just the backend IT systems, it's important there, of course, but then there's a lot more when you get IoT involved, when you get security involved. We have a couple of customers that use Workato as a SOAR engine out there. So it's really fascinating. So Steve, thank you so much. And yeah, I hope this inspired the audience here.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I love talking about this stuff.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.